Hello and welcome to another video with my Alfa Romeo Giulia Veloce long-termer. And today I'm going to be comparing the Veloce to another performance saloon car. And it's not a BMW, it's not an Audi or a Mercedes-Benz or even a Jaguar. It's something much, much closer to home. It's that.
Yes, I've managed to nab myself a lovely Trofeo white Giulia Quadrifoglio in order to make a comparison with the Veloce. There's roughly a £30,000 difference in price, so what does that extra money get you in the real world, and is it worth it?
Now before we get started properly, please don't forget to subscribe to the Parker's Cars channel and turn your notifications on. Right, both cars, exterior, they both look really, really good. I don't think it's just me. These are the best looking saloons of this kind that I reckon you can currently buy. The Veloce is subtler and the Quadrifoglio is a bit more aggressive, but not too aggressive. The main differences, on the outside at least, are lots of carbon. You can see that on the splitter and down the sides and at the back as well. There's more vents on this. The wheels on this particular car, 19-inch alloy wheels. They're not the popular 5-hole design, but I still quite like them. You've also got beefier brakes as well. There's the cloverleaf badge, which obviously Quadrifoglio. And then at the back is a really nice subtle, as you can see, carbon spoiler, just a little lip spoiler on the boot lid. There's a not so subtle rear diffuser. And above that sits the optional Akrapovic exhaust system, which sounds fantastic. Swing into the cabin, and it's a similar story to the outside of the car because the differences are fairly minor, but if you look around you can notice them. So we've got more carbon fibre, obviously. It's on the centre console, it's on the dashboard up here, it's also on the steering wheel. And I like on the steering wheel you've got a nice Quadrifoglio badge on the carbon fibre down there. We've also got leather and Alcantara, so it's a really nice tactile thing to hold. Got these lovely gear shift paddles as well, just like the Veloce. And then a red starter button which just looks a bit sportier. Down here, extra drive mode. I've got race drive mode, which you don't get in the Veloce, and also I've got the adaptive dampers, which you can't get in the Veloce anymore at all. You need to get the Estrema for that if you want adaptive dampers in a non-Quadrifoglio Giulia. The seats, they're also different, and they've also got these nice green seat belts as well, which you've got to be careful what you wear because they can clash for obvious reasons. But yeah, the seats are different, got the green stitching. You can get carbon Seibelt seats, which are very nice. They look really cool, but they are an optional extra. They cost a few thousand extra, and I don't think they're necessary because these are super comfortable. The carbon seats aren't as comfortable, and they do make, in the back, they make it a little bit tricky for passengers and their knees, as I'm sure you can imagine. Now, as I said earlier, this car is around £30,000 more list price than the Veloce, but if you do a finance deal, which a lot of people will do, the price, well, it's more than the equivalent would be in cash. So per month on the same deal, which you'll see appearing on the screen now, it's over £600 more, the Quadrifoglio, than the Veloce. And that's a huge amount. I mean, it's almost double the monthly payment on the Veloce. And I guess the question you've got to ask is, are you getting double the car? Is it worth almost double the amount? And as much as sitting in the interior and talking about the exterior will help, the real way you're going to answer that in a Quadrifoglio is driving it. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now, despite the Giulia Quadrifoglio being around for a good few years now, this is actually the first time I've had an extended period driving the regular QV. So I've driven the GTA and the GTAM quite a bit, but not this one. So this has actually been really interesting. And for those that don't remember, this has got a 2.9 litre twin turbocharged V6 that makes 510 horsepower, 600 Newton meters of torque, 0 to 62, 3.9 seconds, and a top speed in excess of 190 miles an hour. No limiters in this thing. And there's three things that really strike me about this powertrain. The first is how smooth it is. I mean, you can be at low revs, like we are now, and then just press the accelerator, and it's just so silky smooth, whether you're getting it right to the red line, which is around 7,000 RPM, or whether you're using the torque and just accelerating in gear. It is just like butter. You sometimes find that engines on high performance cars like this, they can be a little bit coarse, they can be a little bit rough, but there's none of that here. It is an absolute joy to go through the rev range. As I said, whether you're in gear, whether you're just hanging it to the red line, it's such a lovely engine. And then there's the noise. It's so cultured and delicate and Italian sounding, and when you compare it with the AMG C63 and the BMW M3. I'm not saying that those are not good sounding cars, especially in the case of the AMG, but this is just on a different level. I mean, just listen to the way that the sound just builds up. And this is a car that, a saloon car was designed to sit and go up and down motorways and be a comfortable cruiser. And in base form, that's what this Giulia does. But then they put this masterpiece of an engine in. It properly transforms it. It's an incredible sound, and it's noticeably a lot nicer, as you'd expect, than the 4-cylinder in the Veloce. Gotta say that. Another thing that strikes me is the gearbox. It's an 8-speed automatic, and as far as I can tell, this is the best gearbox of any super saloon that I can remember driving. It's better than the gearbox in the M3, it's better than the C63, the RS4, and it's not just because of how quickly and concisely it changes gears, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, it gives you the gear when you want it, but it's because of how smooth it is in manual mode, but also when you put it back in automatic, it is so well behaved. It doesn't really make you compromise at all, and that's really rare. Don't get me wrong, the gearbox in the Veloce is good, but it properly shines in the Quadrifoglio. I'm also a really big fan of the adaptive dampers in this car, and that might sound a bit odd for people that have seen previous episodes, because I've said that the Veloce, it doesn't need the adaptive dampers, and I stand by that. The passive setup is great, but when you get into something a bit more serious, such as this, they make so much sense. They're supple and comfortable in all of the 3 different stiffness settings, but in comfort mode, it's shockingly civilized. I mean, you could genuinely be fooled into thinking that it's not a Quadrifoglio until the exhaust valves open up and until you start to go through the corners or put your foot down, because the way it rides and how civilized and refined it is, it's deeply impressive. But then, of course, the other side of that is the firmer damper setting, so the mid setting, which you can use in dynamic mode or in race mode, where you can have the mid, but you can also have the full stiffness. And even then, as I said, it's still quite supple, but that's where it allows this car to do things that a saloon really shouldn't be able to do. It genuinely feels like it's only a whisker away from being as flat and as sorted and as agile as some of the best sports cars that you can buy today. And I actually think that part of that reason, and not much seems to be made of this, but part of that is because the curb weight for this car, Alfa Romeo quotes just over 1.5 tons. And when super saloons like this are just getting heavier and heavier, that's a massive advantage. It's got hundreds of kilos advantage over some rivals such as the BMW M3, and it shows. And all of that is helped and complemented by the steering, because on most cars, including some performance cars, there's a noticeable dead zone around the straight ahead, which stops it from being too nervous on motorways. In this, it just doesn't seem to have it. I mean, if I'm wiggling the steering wheel like that, you can see how much I'm moving around, and you get an idea of just how alert it is just off center. But then it's not nervous on motorways at all. You wouldn't know there's any difference until you start to point it into a corner and you feel how on its toes and how willing it is to rotate and turn in. It's a brilliant piece of engineering, and it makes this car feel like it's been set up to do this kind of driving all day long, but then somehow it also does the normal and sensible stuff as well. It's proper witchcraft. It's going to sound like a cliche, because it is a big cliche, and of course they did have some involvement with this car, but if Ferrari were going to make a super saloon, this is what it would be like. It feels every bit the Ferrari saloon car, and when you put it like that 70-odd thousand pound price tag, it starts to make a bit more sense. Honestly, this is a special car. It really is. My only complaint with this car to drive, and it is a small one, is that when you put it in race mode, which you'll want to do because it's the most exciting mode, you need to have the ESC off and the autonomous emergency braking system off. And I don't know why they couldn't separate it so that you can have the ESC on and have it in the most extreme mode. Doesn't sound like too much to ask, and instead, when you put it in race mode, you have to be aware that there is absolutely zero safety blanket. Some people will like that, but I think from a usability point of view, it maybe makes it a bit intimidating, which is a shame because it needn't be.
Of course, I knew the QV was going to be a staggering performance car, but what I wasn't so prepared for was how well it managed to imitate the usability of the Veloce. So with this in mind, I got back into my long-termer and took it for a drive on the same roads.
It's been a while, I'm back in the Veloce, and surprise, surprise, the biggest difference to the Quadrifoglio immediately is the engine. In this, for anyone that's forgotten, it's a 2-litre 4-cylinder petrol. It's got 280 horsepower, 400 newton meters of torque, and 0 to 62 miles an hour in just less than 6 seconds. Now, I've spoken about it in previous updates, and I've said that this is a solid engine, and it is for the amount of money that you're paying. But when you compare it with the Giulia Quadrifoglio's engine, and the amount of money that you're paying for that, then some things do start to show a bit of contrast. And while I'm not suggesting for a second that it should be anywhere close to the Quadrifoglio's 2.9-litre V6, there are some things that I think perhaps Alfa Romeo could have done to make this engine sparkle just a little bit more. I think it could have a little bit more power. I've spoken before about how I actually thought it's got the right amount of power, but now I've had the car for a few months and driven it back to back with the Quadrifoglio. I think that an extra 20, 30 horsepower would really make a difference, especially at the top end. So there's that. There's also the fact that given it is a performance variant, even if it's a fairly light performance variant, the fact you can't turn off or slacken off the ESP system or the ESC system at all is a bit puzzling, especially when you've got the exact opposite problem, as I mentioned in the Quadrifoglio. So that's a bit of an interesting one. And although that kind of thing might not seem so important, I reckon that a fair proportion of Giulia Veloce drivers or buyers would actually quite like to see it. If you disagree, then let me know in the comment section below. But the reason I think that is because this car is just so well balanced and it's such a sweet handling car that with the traction control kicking in as early and as aggressively as it does, it's a shame you can't just turn it down a little bit. In fact, the way this Veloce tackles a twisty road like this, you wouldn't believe that there is that big a price difference between this and the Quadrifoglio. You do get more body roll on these passive dampers, which have to blend a comfortable ride with a taut chassis, but aside from that, it's still got a lot of the elements that make the Quadrifoglio so much fun to drive. So it's still lightweight, it's still got that super quick steering just off center, and it's still got that way that it wants to turn in and rotate through corners. There's no sense that understeer is in this car's vocabulary. And again, it pushes well beyond what should be possible in a 2-litre 4-cylinder saloon car that isn't even the most hardcore version. You honestly don't get this quality of drive from anything made by Mercedes-Benz or Audi or even BMW and Jaguar. The Giulia is genuinely ahead. It's the best handling saloon that you can buy, not just in Quadrifoglio form, but also in Veloce form and in base form. A couple of things though, and it could just be my car. I know it is from the wing mirror wind noise, because a lot of people have said in the comments that they don't get that on their Giulia Veloce, and I wasn't getting it in the Quadrifoglio, so it is making me think it's this particular car that is the issue. And when Thames took it in for the service, for whatever reason, they couldn't find it was beyond the tolerance. So there's that. There's more wind noise in this than there is in the Quadrifoglio, but also the brakes. I know they're not going to be as powerful in this, but the feel through them isn't all that good, and I wonder whether it's worth, when this car goes in for a service soon, them having a look at it, because when you go for the pedal, there's a bit of a squishy dead zone, and then that's when the braking comes in, so it's quite hard to modulate. Those things aside though, the Veloce is still brilliant to drive, even when I've just got out of a Giulia Quadrifoglio. And as much as I'd like to keep telling you about how good it is to drive, I think I need to bring this video to some kind of conclusion, because honestly, I could drive these two cars on these roads all day long, but we do need a verdict. Now, I have to be honest, when I first booked the Quadrifoglio in for a comparison with the Veloce, I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it, because obviously, if money was no object, I think we all know which one we'd pick, and that's, you know, there's a reason why it's so much more expensive. But having said that, and having driven a lot of cars in this job, and a lot of really, really lovely cars, there's very few that I'd spend my own money on. But this thing, this is one of those. If I had the money, I'd definitely be getting one, because it is just spectacularly brilliant. It's got such a well-rounded ability, and it's so fun and exciting, and it looks great. I just think it is absolutely fantastic, and it's the best super saloon out there, and that's saying a lot considering how good the rivals are. But having driven this for hundreds of miles over the last week or so, and then getting back in the Veloce, this isn't a disappointment. I mean, yes, there are things that I'd like to improve, like the engine, for example, especially after driving the 2.9 litre V6 in that. But otherwise, it takes plenty of elements from the Quadrifoglio and puts it into a cheaper package. And I think it is a worthwhile baby brother for the Quadrifoglio. And as praise goes, I don't think it really gets any better. And I've got to say, I'm quite relieved, because I was enjoying the Veloce and I didn't want it to be spoiled after I drove that thing. But it hasn't, which is the good news. So the takeaway then is that if, like a lot of us, you can't afford over £70,000 or £1,300 a month on the Quadrifoglio, there is a very good alternative in the Veloce, or of course the Estrema. So I hope that was useful. I hope you gained something from this video, and it wasn't as foregone a conclusion as you thought it would be, seeing the title. And if you have any questions, let us know in the comments section below about either car, and also any requests for future videos on the Veloce. Don't forget to check out the written article on the parkers.co.uk website. But until the next video, thanks for watching. See you next time.